Welcome, everyone. Today we have Dougal McKenzie, who's the industry head of travel at Google. And he's going to be sharing a presentation on travel industry insights and travel search queries from their organization. And so before I hand it off to Dougal, I wanted to also ask IGLT members and everyone, we'll just, about 10 minutes to 1, we're just going to have you stay on and just ask you a quick question. Just as members of IGLTA and kind of get your feedback for the direction our organization goes moving forward. But for now, we'll hand it over to Dougal, and if I could just please ask everyone to mute your phones or your computers if you're not talking. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is for everybody. I know some of you, I've met some of you last year in New York, and I certainly wish I'd been seeing you a couple of weeks back in Milan as well. But anyway, I hope everyone is well. My name's Dougal, for those who I haven't met before. Hey, before I kick this off, let me say this too. I'm very happy to do this on a semi-regular basis. And so as you go through this, or as I go through this, happy to take questions either during it or at the end. Perhaps it's easier at the end, but either suits for me. So John just put up, I am actually on the board for the foundation for IGLTA as well, if you didn't know that. I'm very happy to do this on a frequency basis for you all if you find it valuable. And so I tell you that for two reasons. One is tell John and Josh if it is useful, right? And if so, then they can let me know how often you want me to do this for you. And secondly, what works and what doesn't work, right? I'm not acutely aware of what different markets are represented on the call today. I'm very happy to go either way, like go into certain markets, dive deeper on certain things, or stay higher level on other things. So if you tell John and Josh what works, then I can tailor it for future. Hopefully that helps you as well. Make sense? I'll just take nodding as a general yeah. I'm going to go through essentially data on two different parts. What we look at first is we look at leading indicator data. Data where we actually do intent or sentiment surveys. We're running these in North America, throughout Europe, and also throughout APAC. And we run these and we ask consumers questions on how willing are they to travel in certain time periods. And on the back of that, would they be willing to stay in a hotel, fly on an airplane, go on a cruise, etc. And also, what would change their mind? What would the leverage be in order for them to want to travel? So those are the leading indicators we're going to go through first. We do that because we find them really good to understand what will a market look like in periods to come. I'm then going to pivot into what is essentially a combination of either lagging indicators and proxy data. So data that we, when we're starting to see, particularly search queries, we're starting to see changes in interest. We look at that year on year, but we look at that from, as I said, a lagging indicator standpoint, because of course it's always slightly after the fact, right? But you'll see some interesting things. A lot of it won't surprise you in the sense, as we see lockdowns come out, we start to see changes in behavior. And I'll show you some of the proxies, because then I do want to leave you with a couple of tools that we've made publicly available and that I think might be helpful to you as well. On that, I'm going to jump into, well, I hope I am. Let me jump here. There we go. That should drop down in a moment, I hope. There we go. This is how we're looking at the different phases of this health crisis that we're going through. I'm going to talk you through these different parts to make sure we understand it before we move on. So along the top, we've put 5 phases of the health crisis that we see the travel industry going through. We all know the first one, right? We've lived and breathed it for the last while as stay-in-place orders came in, as lockdowns were enacted, and everything around the world was about flattening the curve. We're either in that or we're kind of coming past that, and we're kind of largely now heading into phase 2, depending on where you happen to live in the world. And that is where the restrictions are, for better or for worse in some places, certainly for worse in some parts of America, where I am. Some of the restrictions are starting to lift. Local entertainment and things like that are starting to come back. And we're starting to see a little bit of people starting to move out of their house. I'm going to show you at the end some of the mobility reports that we have and some of that data, and we're seeing that come about as well. That leads us into more out-of-home activities, people going back to restaurants and cafes and things, and starting to do a little bit of localized travel, I should say. Level 4 or phase 4 is greater local travel. Domestic travel is certainly the intent that we are seeing of people wanting to travel domestically. far, far greater than would normally be the case. So we're seeing that. Again, it makes sense simply because of borders closing. And we're also seeing a considerable peak in our search behavior around what are being termed clean routes, green routes, travel bubbles, things like that, right? One of the first ones of those to come about was Australia and New Zealand, were the first kind of two countries to announce that they'll do that. We're now seeing Europe announce those sorts of things as well. And then we expect to get into some level of a new normal. And to be honest, we don't exactly know what that is and when that will be. And that will be phase 5. Hey, by the way, yell out if I speak too quickly or if my accent throws you at any time. I try and soften it where I can, but there might still be something there. Hey, so the two kind of main pools of data we look at are a combination of our data and then third-party data. Let me talk a little bit about ours first. I mentioned before the leading indicators of the travel intent surveys that we run. We run these weekly, we run them around the world, and every time we run it, it is a statistically significant data set, so you can rely on the data to be a proof point within that given market. We're going to go into those in a moment, so I'm going to brush through. We, of course, use maps data, right? People search in Google Maps to know where they want to go, and also, of course, particularly things like, do I want to go to a cafe or a restaurant? And bear with me, but can I get my hair done? Because trust me, we are using that as one of the biggest proxies of people being able to get outside their house, and I'll explain when we get there. Flights and hotels data. Our flights product, if you know it, Google Flight Search is pretty much the largest flight search product now. And so we have significant data off the back of that, and same with hotels. And of course, our search data. So they're the data sets that I'm using as I talk to you through stuff today. We're also relying on and using the bottom lot of data. So the STR data, I'm sure many of you know, or most of you know, hotel occupancy, RevPAR data around the world. We look at Homebase. If you don't know Homebase, it is unfortunately only US, although equivalent data sets exist in all other markets. Homebase is logged hourly workers, so people who log in, log out of a machine or in some way in the US. It's the largest base in the US. Incredibly good to see when people can actually go back to work, and you can break it down by vertical, by industry. And so we saw logged hourly workers fall off a cliff in the US when, of course, the country shut down, and we're starting to see it come back out the other side as certain states now allow staff back to work. It's an incredibly good data set within the US to understand what mobility looks like. I don't know all of them for different markets, but certainly they exist in every country and every region. And then lastly, I'm actually not relying heavily on, but we will eventually, is things like TSA, essentially the airport throughput data. We expect that to be the last set of data to come back. Sound good so far? Cool. So this, and by the way, I'm not going to focus just on America. I promise you I'll be looking at many parts of the world. I know many of you are from outside America, but I am going to start with America to give you a little bit of an understanding. This shows you here the percentage of Americans that are unlikely to travel anywhere in the next 2 weeks or the next 3 months, right? Yeah, thank you, John. Please do interrupt if you have questions. I show you this for a reason. Right? Not surprisingly, vast majority said they wouldn't travel anywhere in 2 weeks, and even a majority said they wouldn't travel anywhere in 3 months. We know that it's the state of travel, unfortunately, in the world at the moment. But I show you this particularly because we are seeing improvements over time. Right, we are seeing that number tick down. It's gone from about 75% said they would not travel anywhere in 3 months, now down to 65. It continues to improve. And so there is that promise, there is that hope, and that will continue to improve as we see lockdowns change. The fact is people still want to travel. When I, let me just, sorry. Oh, there we go. So let me tell you one thing though. What was really interesting in this data is while travel sits at 65, willingness and desire to stay in a hotel tipped a milestone last week where more than 50% of Americans, in this case Americans, I'm going to show you international data in a moment, said that they are now would consider staying in a hotel. More than 50% said they would stay in a hotel in 3 months. We tipped the mark. And by the way, it sat up around 80% until recently, and it is slowly coming down or coming down week on week. Make sense? Good. So it looks like on my computer, this looks slightly blurry, so I apologize if it is on yours. It shouldn't be, but it looks a little on mine. I'm going to start with US, or sorry, North America and with European markets, and then I'll pop into APAC markets after that. I know what I don't have, which will disappoint a couple, I don't have Latin America or CALA, and I don't have Africa in this data set. I will find someone and get that for you if that's of relevance to you. Again, please pass that on to Josh and John. So on this is a continuation of what I showed you before. Firstly, let me be clear. This is those who are willing to travel within their own country. Cool. Whether that be in the next 3 months through to 3 to 6, 6 to 9, etc., in those markets. I show you this because you know, it's interesting. There's so if we take the top data point, just so I make sure you understand how to read it, 14% of Canadians say they are willing to travel somewhere in Canada in the next 3 months. 28% say they're willing to travel somewhere in the next 6 months total. And you see that pent-up energy in a country like Italy, where they've been under significant lockdown for quite some time. I'm just trying to read the questions as they pop up. I'll try and answer that one in a moment. I just saw one popped up. But you see that pent-up energy in Italy, and you start to see that coming through in a lot of countries. Italians certainly intend to travel domestically, pretty much half of them in the next 6 months. Cool. Do you want me to answer? Let me just quickly read that question and see if I can answer it on the fly. No, my computer's lost it, so I can't see it. Did you want to ask that question?
Perhaps, if not, Juan.
So,
Oh,
yeah, it's me. Hi. I was asking if there is there a significant change of motivation in destination, meaning are search for nature much higher than search for cities?
Yeah, so you've read the presentation ahead of time.
No,
I'm going to get to
I haven't.
Yeah, no, so the short answer is yeah. Look, not surprisingly, significant growth in people wanting to go to beaches, mountains, nature, and even just smaller rural places, and a decline in city destination desire. It makes sense, right? We know that from an isolation, stay at home, from a social distancing standpoint, and you'll see that in the data in about 2 or 3 slides.
Okay. I shut up.
That's right. No, thank you. Richard, did you want to say something? No. Okay, I'm going to move on. There we go. Oh, there we go. This is the same set of data, the same looking set of data, but this time, instead of being traveling domestically, it's traveling abroad. So where would they, not where would they want to go? Are they willing to travel internationally? And again, the next 3 to 6, etc. And you can see the one thing you take away from this is those numbers are far smaller in the shorter period of time, right? And so certainly, you know, not only because of logistics and regulations, but from a consumer desire as well, we expect to see significantly less international travel, certainly in this calendar year. By the way, I'm going to come to some of the search query data in a moment to show you a little bit of variation on that as we get through to it. And then this answers your question one before, right? If you were willing to travel in the next 3 months, where would you most likely want to go? Right. And so while I haven't got change in time or change over time in this is point in time data as of our last survey, which was run on Monday or completed on Monday this week. You can certainly see, for example, Italians are all about going to beach destinations. And even and a lot of countries are much more around beach. The second one, if you can't read it very well, is a rural location, a small town, then it comes into a major city after that. And so certainly kind of beaches and nature are featuring incredibly heavy, far more so than major cities might have otherwise previously when we ran this sort of data. I'm going to show you the APAC equivalent briefly for a number of APAC markets that we've done. In a moment, I'll show you a little bit about how APAC particularly is a story of 2 halves, you know, where it's significant differences between countries like India and Japan. And I say those two because there's no travel intent in those 2 countries, or very, very little, versus countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, with a significantly more. The sample size, Marco, in answer to your question, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. I know that in each market that we run it is statistically significant, and that the error is fairly low. And so it is significant, and sufficient to rely on when we use this data with clients and so forth. Thank you. Cool. And so, look, you can see this. I'm not going to dwell too heavily on this because I want to spend more time on some of the search data in a moment. But again, you can get a feel for who is willing to travel in the next 3 months within their own country. You'd expect to see Singapore tiny, of course, and those who are willing to travel further, those who are willing to travel in further out time periods. Same for international, where typically it's a little higher willingness to travel internationally. And part of that, we believe, our basis is that they've obviously been through this for slightly longer and are coming out the side in many of the countries a little bit earlier than we are in the Northern Hemisphere. I want to spend a little bit of time on this page because I think it's relevant in how you work with travelers into your market and how you actually capture or create interest in traveling to your market. So we asked them, of those people who are willing to travel, what would it take, or what would the leverage be to convince you to travel, right? And now, while this looks at flight, hotel, car, and cruise, it gives you a little bit of an idea, even if the industry or the things you're thinking about are slightly different. What we know is pricing is important in a lot of areas. Pricing is important in some. I'll touch on a little bit why car it's more important in a moment. But certainly what you see come through on a couple of things are cleanliness and flexibility are the two big things that feature in this, whether that be high-grade cleaning on whatever the subvertical might be, cancellation, or things like sanitization, masks, and so forth. Those are the things that pop up the most in all of the questions that we've been asking. The reason we see car so heavy on discounting is not because discounting is so important to car hire. It's actually because they take for granted some of the other things. So, for example, they take for granted the sanitizers and wipes. What I mean by that is you're on your own in the car. It's less important, right? Whereas you're with others on a plane, therefore it's slightly more important. And that's the reason that one bubbles to the top a little bit more. Any questions on this? Oh, sorry, if you said this earlier, but will you share the slides afterwards? I can't see it. Oh, they're very blurry. I'm so sorry. I can't share all of these slides. Some of it is data that I cannot share externally. I'll share what I can, and I'll give that to John and Josh to share out. My apologies. I wonder if I move it to here, does that make it less blurry? Anybody?
That looks a little bit better for me.
Okay. All right, I'll hope. Unfortunately, now I can't see the questions is the only problem. So maybe if I move that up there, I can. There we go. Cool. My apologies for this. I won't blame Google Meet. Otherwise, I'm not doing myself justice anyway. Makes sense? I'm going to jump down. Oh, there we go. So I want to pivot away from that kind of leading indicator intent data into our query databases. And I want to show you a few pieces of data and then I answered your question before. The person said, can I share this? Well, what I'd rather do though is this is take your questions, obviously in this call, but then also feel what you'd like to see more of. And then if John and Josh want me to come back again, then I'm happy to come back and bring the detail to you and bring the results to you in more detail next time. So this is North America. I want to explain how this data works for you because you'll see this represented on a number of slides in a few moments. The blue line is consumer queries in the travel industry year on year. We take a 5-day rolling average for those, and we do that very simply. It smooths out some anomalies that we see. For example, we've sometimes seen some huge spikes in data when it's not interest in travel. It's because of a news item that's come about. I'll give you an example. We're seeing huge spikes in United Airlines in the US at the moment. It's certainly not because people are wanting to travel. It's because they're packing their planes and people are unhappy with that. Right? And that's why we're seeing spikes periodically. We saw the same in parts of Europe when there are certain announcements on the back of things. It could be confused that people are wanting to travel versus actually some other piece of news in the cycle that's going around. So the 5-day flattens that and gets us consistency. So the blue line shows us queries year on year. The red bars show us queries for 5 days versus the 5 days before. So the reason those two things are important is one is it shows us, let me explain. The blue line shows you exactly where travel fell off towards the left side of the thing. It fell down to about 70% year on year of the interest that people were showing through Google in wanting to travel, right? But it's now back up to around 40% of a year ago. That might still sound bad. It's 40% lower than a year ago, but it's a vast improvement on where it is, and it shows that starting to rise. The red lines kind of show you more real-time interest, and as soon as it gets above that flat line through the middle, the zero line, we know there is positive growth versus the period before. And so you take away from this for North America, the fact that A, we're seeing an improvement versus year ago. We're down versus year ago, but we're seeing an improvement. And then in the most recent time periods, we're now starting to see this positive growth and this positive movement and people wanting to start to look to travel again. Hopefully that makes sense on what that is. I'm now going to dive a little deeper on a few things now that I've explained. This is where those queries are coming from, and this is what's driving some of that growth, right? And so the yellow line, by the way, is always much higher. We see significantly higher in terms of the number there on air. It fell off a cliff, but what we've seen coming out the other side, what's driving some of the interest on Google is vacation rentals. So you could call it an Airbnb, you can call it something like that. It's anything in that rental accommodation bracket is the biggest driver, but followed right behind that, by the way, is car rentals and holidays as well. That's within North America. Europe is really a story of a number of parts, and so it actually looks fairly flat. And you might say that rise above the other side on the right side in the red is fairly small. It's a story again, as is APAC, of two parts, where we're seeing some countries actually showing really good intent, good positive interest, I should say, in our database. Others really still far, far behind that. Let me give you an example of Germany. Right, where it's not surprising, as they've reduced some of those lockouts and so forth, we're seeing that. Oh, there we go. We're seeing that come out quite strongly, and in fact, Germany is now back to about only down 20% year on year for our database on query. So it's actually quite close back to where it could have been a year ago, and you can see that positive red bar has been up now for about 2 weeks. So if I look at Europe again, this kind of shows that same sort of thing, but it just really highlights how Germany is leading that line up. And what I do, I show you this for a reason, because I think as you start to see different parts of Europe come out of their lockdown greater and greater, you will start to see other countries mirror that spike that we're seeing in Germany, in that rise in their interest in wanting to travel again. And this is domestic travel intent. I'm going to pause. No, I'm going to move on. And again, I'm kind of showing you what I showed you before for the North American market. It's typically driven by vacation rental style interest in our platform, followed by holidays, I should say, sorry, holidays and car rental as well. Those are the things that are driving the interest in behavior with us. I wanted to show you this simply because it's phenomenal for one market. But you see that in this case, again, it's vacation rentals the most, followed by holidays and followed by car rentals. But it's Denmark. And I show you this simply because, in the last kind of couple of weeks, we're actually seeing 300% of the queries we would have seen a year ago. Now, that's because of the pent-up energy and the fact that people haven't been able to until recently. But again, this is year-on-year growth in queries in a market where people are certainly wanting to do domestic travel fairly heavily. Yeah.
Looks like it's paused. We'll give it a second to see if it rebuffers.
Oh, sorry. Where are you up to? What can you see on the slide? Can you see?
Dougal, I'm seeing Denmark categories domestic. Is that about?
Yeah. Yes, that's good. So you can see that. Perfect. Okay. So did you hear me explain? So I showed this. The reason I narrowed in on Denmark as one country in this instance was simply to explain again that line there for rentals, right, is to show that vacation rentals as a search query, or as a category, I should say, more so than just one query, within Google is up 300% year on year in the last kind of week or so, and which is pretty phenomenal given the market that we're in. And it shows a couple of things. One is it shows that, as countries allow people to travel, or people kind of want to get back to travel, there is the demand there. The demand is coming. And secondly, is we're seeing the shift to the sort of holiday that allows people to travel domestically, potentially drive, and continue to have those kind of the privacy that they want, the social distancing and the isolation that they may seek from a hygiene or from a cleanliness standpoint. And so we're seeing vacation rentals come out the other side significantly higher than before, and you can see it particularly in a country like Denmark. Cool. I mentioned before, APAC is a story of multiple parts. India and Japan are really, there's very, very little interest from a travel standpoint at the moment. We're seeing very low, and that probably mirrors, what we see in the press or the fact that in India, it's under pretty stringent lockdown laws at the moment. But on the flip side, and it's masked in this, but we are seeing Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines actually showing quite significant growth in, again, domestic travel. Now, I want to show you this for a reason. I realize it's an eye chart, and I'm going to do one of two things. Actually, why don't I do this? I'm going to bring this up and share this tab. Has that come up? I just need one person to tell me yes, because I can't see anyone on the screen really. Let me see if I can.
Yeah.
It's come up?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show you a tool that is, in this instance, is internal, but I'm happy to show it to you each time I come. But then I'm going to show you what the external version of this tool is, right? So bear with me. I'm going to make sure you're aware of a tool that we have made available publicly that gives you some element of this data. Right? This has got 4 categories. It's got hair salons. I'll explain why. Clothing boutiques, accommodation that includes both hotels and vacation rental style accommodation, and then air. And we look at it from a year-on-year interest, a year-on-year absolute, a week-on-week interest change, and a week-on-week absolute. That's the 4 columns for each of those categories along. I've sorted this purposely by hair salon year-on-year change, right? Which is why Portugal's bubbled to the top, followed by Spain, Germany, Thailand, and so forth. Let me explain why we did this. 2 things. One is from about 3 different data sources, we know that one of the first things that people want to do is get their hair cut or colored or whatever that may be, right? We know there's that energy. People haven't been able to do it. People consider it to be a need. The other reason is people consider it to be somewhat safe. They know that going into a hair salon, there's one-on-one, that sort of behavior. It's not like going to a restaurant or a bar where they can't control the situation as much. Not only that, what we saw is, as we saw the data fall off, as stay-at-home orders were put in place, we saw in our MAPS data a really high correlation with hair salons, and we've seen the high correlation come out the other side. So for a number of reasons, we feel really good about hair salons as a proxy for mobility, and as a proxy for mobility for the ability to start to think about travel. Hopefully that makes sense. Clothing stores, slightly the same. Again, it's the next sort of thing people want to start to do. And then we flow that through into, obviously, the categories we're particularly interested in: accommodation, air, movement, and travel. Cool. And so what you start to see is, you can see there is 160% year-on-year increase in people searching in Google Maps in this instance for hair salons near me, whether their local hair salon is open, etc., etc. And we see that flow through. You can see if you move across to the right, you start to see there's increase in green in accommodation and week on week in air. They're really, really light, but we're seeing consistency in the data start to come through as those things happen, right? And so we see week on week change before we see year on year change. That makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense on why. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this database, because trust me, if I scroll down, you'll see it not only it goes through every single region and every single part of the world. And so it takes a long time. What I want to do is show you that, because I'm hoping I can go back to this and show you this, which is publicly available. If you haven't seen our mobility reports, I would recommend that you do search for those. So if you search into Google mobility reports, they're available publicly. You can download them. We break them down not only by country, we break them down by region. So I brought up here just one screenshot of one region in Italy as an example, but they exist for every country, or virtually every country where we have data, I should say, and broken down by region. And what you can see here is, again, different categories.
Excuse me, we're not seeing the mobility reports.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's taking so long. Oh, I know why. Here we go. This should bring it up. My apologies, Clark. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's brought that up now. My sincere apologies. So this is a screenshot of the mobility reports for one region in Italy. And it shows you for the different categories like retail, grocery, parks, transit, workplace, and residential, what the mobility has been period over period and change in that. And I would urge you to use this, based on what I was saying before, as a proxy for people's ability to get out and about, people's ability to start to not only get back to normality, but ability to start to travel again. And so if you search in Google for Google Mobility Reports, you can pull this by your location or the locations that you're interested in as a source market for where you are as well. I'll pause for questions if there are any on that. Cool. Cool. So that's all I pulled in data to start with. What I wanted to do, thank you, is I actually wanted to spend as much time as possible answering questions for you. And back to my initial point, determining what works and doesn't work, so I can kind of bring you more of this data if it's helpful. So I'm going to stop on that, John and Josh, if that makes sense, and then open it up for as many questions as people want to ask.
Yes, thank you. And this was, like you said, a great test on seeing what the members want and what they would value. So yeah, if everyone just wants to put in the chat that you have a question, and then you can ask it, just so we don't have everybody shouting out at once. No questions? That's surprising.
It's either a good or a bad sign. It can go either way.
Okay, I haven't been on a call yet where Mr. Krieger didn't have a thoughtful question.
Can I show the airline query trend? Yeah. Let me keep talking while I bring that up. What day is it today? It's this way. I'll bring that up while we talk. No other questions?
And then let's see. Can the mobility reports be run for year-over-year comparison?
No. So what we show there really, so they are a year-over-year comparison. So they are a year-over-year comparison.
Well, and then Jim McMichael's asking, what do you include or mean by holiday in the search categories or package holidays?
Sorry, say that again.
What do you include or mean by holiday in search categories or package holidays?
Yeah, so it's exactly that. It's any package holidays, which are far bigger in places like UK and certain parts of Europe than they are in the US. It's anything that's a bundled product.
Mm.
And then Paul Gauger is asking, is it too early to know the desire for international travel?
In what way? I mean, some of that data shows the desire for international travel. A lot of that does.
I don't know if, can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you, buddy?
Good, thanks. No, I thought you were referring that mainly was domestic travel, like Germans traveling in Germany or Denmark traveling in Denmark. So I just wondered, like, are Germans thinking about going to other parts of Europe, or Americans thinking about going to Europe?
Yeah, so if I go back to this here, and perhaps I didn't explain this well enough here. If I go back to this, right? Hold on, let me bring it up. If I bring up this slide now, right? This is, it'll come up in 2 seconds. There we go. This is traveling abroad. Cool. And so whilst it doesn't show which market in this particular slide, so the top one would be 3% of Canadians intend to travel internationally in the next 3 months. 8% of Germans intend to travel internationally in the next 3, or 8 plus 8, 16 in the next 3 to 6, in the next up to 6 months. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Hey, now if I show you this slide, hopefully this has come up on the screen now instead. This has answered your question, I think, Clark, you mentioned before. In this case, this is the Americans one, but this is showing what I said before around the fact that hotels is tipped 50% on willingness to travel, and then flights is still above it, but interestingly, flights is only just above it at 54% willing to unwilling, and therefore 46% willing to travel in the next 3 months. Did that answer your question, Clark?
Yeah, thank you, Dougal.
Cool, no problem.
And then Stacy is asking,
She wants to circle back to the consumer search interest slide, the one with the green boxes. Can you explain where the 25% discount rate came from?
Yeah, so we actually asked that question, right? So we gave them options to choose from, one of which was a 25% discount. So a question you could say, why was it 25% versus any other number? But we chose that as a fairly rounded number of a discount. Cool, substantial enough to trigger consumer interest, but at the same time achievable or realistic as well. So that's why is that. Yeah, it's not to say 25 is the right number. Really, it's to understand, is price a trigger for people to want to travel versus cleanliness versus loyalty and so forth. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And then Marco is asking, have you seen it?
Just before we go into that, as I talk to different companies in the market, a lot of them don't intend to use price as their primary trigger, right, to reinvigorate travel. They intend to use, as I said, the cleanliness and so forth. Typically, when we came out of things that were financially, so for example, 9/11 in the US, the 2008 global financial crisis, price was one of the biggest triggers to get people back into traveling. The question in this case was, this is not a financial crisis, right? It's a health crisis. And hence, that's why we're seeing, while price is still important, many other factors are what people are considering. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Marco is asking, have you seen a shift in people requesting or searching more for residences, renting, or Airbnb rather than hotel?
Yeah, maybe I didn't do a good job explaining that before. That was particularly the data. I mustn't have done a very good job, I'm sorry. We're seeing a significant increase in people looking at house-based rentals, right? So when I say vacation rentals, I mean Airbnb, holiday homes, whatever that might be, versus hotels. Cool. That was the slide where I'm going to bring it up briefly to show you. Let me show you where I want to show you the one for Europe as an example because it's so pronounced. Let me share. Europe is more pronounced than others. Hopefully this has come up on the screen again. Let me be very clear. Is that up now?
Yeah.
Cool. That orange line that you can see kind of above everything through the middle, but right significantly above the others, that orange line there is vacation rentals. It's holiday homes, it's Airbnb, Vrbo, whoever you want to consider. Anything in that genre. And that's rising significantly, right? In fact, you can see it. Hotels is actually the fourth line down. It's the greenish line under the blue one. And so whilst there's an increase in hotels, it's absolutely being left behind by holiday homes or vacation rentals. And again, it fits with what we kind of expected to be the case. People want to be able to isolate in some way. Now, by the way, that's why I take you back to those incentives before, or those leverages. What will help people overcome that for hotels is feeling confident on the cleanliness, feeling confident on things like that, right? One could argue hotels have better cleaning standards than vacation rentals. And so that's how you overcome that, is messaging around cleanliness, messaging around hygiene. Juan, you came off mic. Nope. Cool.
Great. And then Scott Seed is asking, is spend on travel advertising matching your intent data?
I wish. Not even close. Not even close. Look, I won't go into too much because it would be inappropriate of me, but it's vastly down. Right? Any of you could see that if you were to go to Google at the moment, and if you were to search for things that you might have normally searched for, whilst you would normally, in a normal world, have seen, I don't know, 2 or 3 ads at the top, perhaps, you may see none at the moment. And so that should be proof point enough to you of the state of advertising with us at the moment in the travel industry. We don't expect it to come back to where it was for quite some time. Now, in saying that, and what I can share with you too is a lot of advertisers in this industry went completely dark on the back of coronavirus. And by the way, a lot of them announced that in the press, right? Companies like Hilton and Marriott went dark and they announced that in the press. Many companies are now starting to come back in. Admittedly, they're dipping their toe in slowly, they're being cautious, and the approach they're taking is to capture demand versus create demand. And so we're seeing that absolutely. But we also see them starting to think about how do they create demand, how do they stimulate it. When it comes to stimulating demand, it goes back to, again, what I said is telling the world that it is safe to travel based on cleanliness, based on hygiene, and of course, pushing things like booking flexibility, cancellation, and so forth. They're the big things. Yeah.
Great. And then Juan was asking, do you know if the searches for hotels have changed from OTA to hotels direct web?
Yeah, good question, Juan. Look, I haven't seen data that says that they have. Now, back to my point before, we're not seeing the OTAs dominate our search results as they used to, right? Because they dominated it based on paid advertising. You know that, you could see that, depending on the query, depending on whether they're allowed to bid on your brand term and so forth. But they dominated that. They're not in there in the same way at the moment. I haven't seen consumer behavior change towards hotels and so forth yet. I haven't seen any of that. But what you would expect to see, though, is without the paid advertising, a brand hotel, one like yourself, with yours, with the Axel hotels, etc., you would of course win the organic results on that sort of behavior. So, but I haven't seen the change in consumer behavior. Nothing to suggest that yet. Hopefully that answers your question, Ron.
And then Jim is asking, is vacation rental search also up for the United States or West Coast of US?
Yeah. That is this on the screen now?
Yeah, North America top categories.
Yeah, and by the way, the US looks identical to this because it's so dominant for North America, right? So this is obviously including Canada, but if I were to show you the US, it looks very, very similar. The green line, I don't know why we changed colors. I didn't do the graph myself. But in this case, the green line is vacation rentals, holiday homes, and so forth. Again, it's still what's driving that increase and that interest, followed by, I'm surprised, air is actually kind of coming up in that second group of cluster. In many other markets, we're not seeing air nearly as high as that. Yeah, perhaps it's because they haven't grounded airlines here in the same way. Yeah.
Well, great, thank you.
That's it for questions. Do me a favor, feedback to the IGLTA folks, if this is valuable, what was valuable and what wasn't valuable. Please tell me both of those, and if you'd like to see more, and then if John will have me, I'm happy to come back and do it again.